Uh, Hello. My name is Jonathan. I am an artist, tech artist type person at Free Lives. And I've I and some colleagues have been working on a game called Second Earth. We have these new bugs that are coming in that would be running into your base and exploding when they die. Um, so we've needed some explosions for them. And these explosions would be sort of gooey bug explosions. Um, so I'm going to be making that on stream today. Sort of kind of an idea of what I'll be making. It's like this there's some sort of core shape, um, and a bit of a shock wave and little bits coming off. So that's the idea. Um, Things sometimes change as I work on them because I mess things up and sometimes they look better. So the way you typically want to do things though is that you do want to plan things out right so that you know what elements of an effect you're gonna have. Um, so the so the problem with effects, or like I don't know, the cool thing or the problem with effects, it depends on who you are, is that there are many ways to do them, and all of them have like pros and cons. Um, so I guess I'll like talk a little bit about that. So everything that you see in your game is, especially in a 3D game, but it's like there's sort of a mesh, and the mesh is really just a canvas for your. Let's give it an outline. So we've got our mesh, which is uh just a canvas on which some textures are painted. And if you're using a particle system, let's just quickly make one. Um, so if you've got a particle system, these particles are still just meshes with textures on, but they're meshes that are like just squares that are always facing your canvas. And if you have a 2D game, it's basically the same thing, except your entire game is made up out of like little squares or whatever, like flat mesh. Um, so when you move to being a 3D game, you can still use this, or you can use 3D mesh. You've got a bunch of options. And when you've got like this mesh that you're drawing on, you can also like basically play a video on them too. And so typically in a lot of AAA games, they will create a fluid simulation or create some other kind of asset that they would then like play on one of those canvases. So if we look at sort of some reference, this one's not the right page. Opera is really bad at reattaching tabs. So if we look at something like super beautiful like this might not load. But there's this like beautiful swishy purple explosion. Like it's very stylized. But there are these beautiful shapes, but you can't like clearly see where a mesh would be if you were making this in 3D. And so you end up with these beautiful shapes, but they only really work as like a 2D thing. So now if you imagine having that shape here and you see it and it's like it looks great from this angle, but now you're a 3D game and you want to look down at the thing from above, then what happens? And that's really tricky. And so making video games is basically like applying hack after hack after hack. What website is this? This is called Huaban. It is basically Pinterest, but it's like Pinterest, the Chinese version. Given that like they seem to clone a lot of other websites and just make Chinese versions of them. But what's really nice about Huaban in particular is that there are some Chinese developers that are like really really great at at making, especially these sort of stylized effects. They've got like a community that is just like dedicated to churning this stuff out. So like they make such beautiful things. And it's their work is almost never realistic. Whereas like in the West, games have gravitated generally like more toward either like very 2D or realistic effects. China basically hasn't really done realistic effects much at all. So when you look at like even in the 3D games, right? Like the effects are almost always magical and stylized and stuff. I have found that it's really difficult to get these GIFs to load sometimes, but I think it's the same with Pinterest. Sometimes they just so if you were to look at something like this, you know, there are like all of these little explosion, like little pieces happening. And this, if you looked at it from the top and it showed these sort of same round shapes, it probably wouldn't feel bad at all. So in which case with those, maybe using like billboard particles would be fine. A billboard is like a square or some sort of mesh that always faces your camera. Whereas maybe with some of these like these bursty shapes, these look fine from the side, but maybe from the top, if those still played like flat, they might look a bit strange. But maybe you don't care. So that's something to maybe like think about if you're making a video game. If you can restrict your camera angle, that's a really big deal because it makes a lot of things elsewhere really easy, like effects. So in our case, we do have a 3D game. We are able to rotate our camera all the way around. We're able to go right in, and we can also sort of do this tilting thing, which is kind of a nightmare for me because, oh look, you can start to see like skybox and stuff, and maybe we need to do those, which may come in the future. So when we look at this thing, what are the different pieces that I guess we'll have? So the biggest one is this like this main piece, which is like I imagine it being sort of goopy, like if you had bug skin that was like stretched with acid or something and just like exploded. So there might be bits of skin that come off, but because it's an explosion, we want sort of some of the punchiness of that. So there might be a shockwave. There might be like bits of fiery things. Might put in some, I don't know, burning effects or something. So this is like a really rough sketch, and usually I'd want to plan it a lot better than this. And because I haven't, I might pay for it, but we will see. So so typically people who make effects end up getting shouted at a lot by graphics programmers or someone who cares about performance because it's really easy to just turn up numbers and end up with some crazy stuff. So I brought in a mesh that is basically like, it's basically a sphere. It's a little bit squished, but this is roughly the shape of what our explosion might be. And I can tell Unity to use this mesh. What's it called again? It's called Sphere 001, which is a terrible name, and I will probably regret it later. And it's massive right now, so we need to get it down to the right size. So this is also why FX artists can get crapped on a lot, because so this mesh is fairly dense. I don't know if you can see this, but it has quite a lot of geometry, and part of this is to get it to be round, but part of it is also because we want to be able to like distort this mesh, and if we don't have enough vertices, then we don't have enough information to distort things with. So this is like, it's 758 verts, which as like a single thing is not that big a deal. But if you decide, oh, you know, this thing looks great, I'm just gonna play it on everything, then you end up with like 50 particles times 750 Verts or whatever, and you end up with quite a lot going on. So typically with what I'm about to do, I only do this with things that I know will only be used fairly sparingly. Especially because, in this case, I might have a whole bunch of these like exploder bugs come in, and then they all explode and sort of a chain explosion, and now it's not just like one explosion at a time, it's a whole bunch. Are you using any spatial shader for that? I am going to. I need to set this chat window to be always on top because I keep not seeing the chat. Always on top. That's funny. So I press always on top, and then I can't see the settings menu anymore. Okay. So I want only one of these to appear, and at the very start, and I don't want it to move yet. This duration doesn't really matter because it's just a once-off thing, but I set it sort of low enough that if this thing looped a bunch, that I could see it, so I can play with settings. And let's just start with a lifetime of like half a second. So we want it so that, hey, if we wanted to place it somewhere, that it explodes right there. So we've got a couple of problems. The one is this mesh is always like facing the camera, no matter how I look at it. So that in the renderer, we change render alignment to world. And now we can see it from different angles, and it's fine. It's also spawning randomly around there. So we can either turn off the shape, or we can just set it to something with like tiny values. So the advantage of still using a sphere with a tiny radius is that you can then change the positions of things, which might be helpful. In fact, I think I'm gonna do this now. So for some reason, when you spawn particle systems, they're spawned with like a negative 90 rotation on the x-axis, so that like they're always shooting out along the z here, which is fine. It's just weird. And if I'm nesting a bunch of particle systems, it can potentially be a problem, especially if we're spawning them, if we're spawning them in code, to have to like correct for the rotation every time. So I like to have at least the paired one. I like to have with 0 rotation. Is there a reason why you aren't using an iconosphere? Yes, there is. We will see why shortly. Actually, maybe not that shortly, because writing the shader might take a while, but but we'll see eventually. It's mainly because of how the UVs are done. Cool. So let's give this thing a material. Goopy sphere. Okay. And when this thing spawns, I want it to grow. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it grows, and at the end it sort of comes back in a bit. Kind of how like you have an explosion, there's a lot of heat, everything expands, and then it creates sort of like a vacuum that pulls back again. Maybe something like that. So let's start on the shader. So I'm gonna make it a standard surface shader. And the reason for that is if it's gonna be this sort of liquid type thing, that I think goo would kind of be. It probably still interacts with light. And even if it's going to be very bright and emissive, we can still put that in, and that'll be fine. That's the main difference, really, when you're making any of these shaders. The standard surface one is like, it just does lighting calculations for you, which can sometimes be really annoying. So it's like, if you know that lighting things is not an issue, then it's probably best not to use this, because it does a lot for you, but it makes a bunch of assumptions that can sometimes trip you up. Cool, so let's open this shaders. Where are you? Sort by modified. Cool. So this is what you get to start with. And I find some of these comments really annoying. Like, if you're gonna comment your code, then comment it because the code's not doing something like obvious. Like this makes sense, but that one's saying, "Oh, metallic and smoothness come from slider variables," but it says that already. Can you make a game with shaders only? Technically, probably. You could probably make a game that just runs on your GPU, and I guess that counts. A lot of people make like simulations and things just to practice. Okay, so a surface shader, this like default one, doesn't give you a vertex shader portion. It just like happens behind the scenes. And one of the things that I want to do with this like goopy thing is to be able to distort the vertices to make it like bulbous. So we need to add that. And because I don't write these very often, there's a bunch of syntax that like I never remember. So I always just go and check. And it's like Unity. So it's not the shader variables one, but it's right here. Writing surface shaders, surface shader examples. So this custom data per vertex, this part. So like normal extrusion with a vertex modifier is basically what we're doing here. So we need a vertex colon the name of our vertex shader, and then the vertex shader itself. We actually want more than this. We want this one. Okay, so if we go back to here, cool, and we need to say vertex vert. So nothing should happen now. In fact, let's not do this size animation because that's going to be annoying. Okay. So now we want this thing to sort of distort in some way. And what I'm hoping for, although I closed that sketch, which was silly of me, what I'm hoping for is to have like this sort of like goopy bulbous looking thing going on. And there are a bunch of ways to do that, but the way that I think works quite well is to use a texture that you read in the vertex shader to offset those verts. And you can reuse this texture later on anyway. You probably want to do that because you need them to sync up. But what is very convenient is if your texture has that sort of goopy look that you want, and you could paint it manually or you can generate it. And Substance Designer conveniently has a node called cells that basically does that. So you can sort of change the scale and stuff. And what's really convenient about this is that these noises, like the cells, they already tile. So if you were scrolling your UVs, this would just tile automatically. And we can also get like a normal map or whatever from it, however we need. So if we just save this out. Oh. In case you hear whimpering in the background, we have a new puppy who's joined her family of pets. And he's undergoing this sort of training thing where you sort of keep him around-ish, but he's sort of not allowed to wander or something. I don't really know the specifics. So this would be, oh, in fact, yeah, let's start with this. So this would be like cells. Okay. So if we look at this, the way that it exported it is it created a texture that has that cell thing in the red channel and then nothing in green and blue, which is why it imported weird. So we're going to use this data to distort our mesh. Cool. So to read a texture in your vertex shader, you can't use text2d, you have to use text2d LOD. So let's just, and we're looking at main text, and we're using our UVs, which are just that. But text2d LOD needs like a float 4 to look up coordinates. And we can look that up. It's like text2d LOD. I never remember what the other coordinates are for either. So as you can tell, maybe my memory isn't very good, but they're like bits that I just don't care to remember because I just never use them. But the first 2 coordinates are the coordinates like your UVs for your lookup. The last one is the level of detail. I guess it's like a MIP thing. Here it doesn't say what the Z is for. So maybe that's for in case you had a 3D texture or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, all I know is I can put zeros in here and it's fine. Okay, so that gives me the texture that I've read up, and now I can just distort the positions. So that would be v.vertex.xyz, and we want to distort them outward along the normal, just like that Unity example. Times text, let's just say. And this ends up with an error because I'm silly somehow. 43. Incorrect number of arguments. Oh, this might not have just been. Okay. And then we need to put that texture on this material. Oh, we need to put the shader on here too. What was the shader called again? GUI explosion. And put that in here. And now we can see that this is like kind of distorted. So we probably want to give us some control over how much to distort this. So we can say like distort strength. And put that in here too. So now we have got a little property here that we can change just how much this thing should distort. Okay, so that's the distortion part, but now I guess we'll see why I didn't use an iconosphere. So if we start scrolling our textures, so to do that, we can add to this, and I want to scroll down Y. So I'm going to say plus float 2, 0 time on Y. And we probably want a float speed thing that we can control too. A speed variable. Scroll speed. Okay. So that gives us this like, it's kind of animating. I don't know how easy it is to see because it's still just white. But all of these verts are just, let me slow this down actually. So these verts are actually just moving like out and in along their normal. But when you're not seeing the wireframe, it looks like it's sort of moving downward, which kind of makes it look kind of goopy too. So I'm liking that. Okay, and this is part of why I didn't use an iconosphere, because I need the UVs to be such that when I scroll along my V direction, that it scrolls down all around here and comes all out of a point, right? So like, yeah, okay. So this is part of it done, but you can see this highlight here. It almost doesn't move. Like it's kind of moving out and in with the verts because the canvas is moving. But what we should actually be seeing is something more like showing the sort of bulbousness, and we're not seeing that. So I need to figure out a way to change the normals on my mesh so that it also shows me kind of what's going on with this like movement. So how are we going to do that? Well, we can either change the normals on the verts themselves, which would be one way, or we could create a normal map out of it and then read that, and maybe that would work fine too. So I'm not sure which way would be best, but with a normal map, at least we would get these like, this would be very what's the word? Like we'd see these divisions between the bulbous bits, whereas if we just did it in the vertices, like those verts are pretty far apart. These verts are pretty far apart, and you may not get a clear distinction between what's happening. Like here, it's actually pretty good, but other bits may not be. So let's just try making a normal map out of this. And I'm seeing another problem here, which is that there's like this kind of a splitting happening here. And that's a bit awkward. But I don't know, that's really small. Maybe. So the other thing that I guess I want to say is there are ways to do things perfectly. And with an effect, if you're gonna like freeze it and say freeze, oh, there's a problem there that's you can be really nitpicky about it. But this is also an explosion that's gonna appear for like 0.3 of a second or something. And during that time, it's also like gonna be animating its size and stuff. So it's like if you're gonna see that problem in something moving this quickly, then okay, fix it. If not, cool, save time and move on. So let's do the sort of normal map part now. Okay, how am I going to do this? So conveniently, there's this height to normal world units node in Substance Designer as well. What I'd like to do is to blur these edges a bit because, well, maybe I don't have to. Let's do it this way first and just see. It might actually just be fine. So I'm gonna change how this texture is done. I'd like to not use two textures because then I have to like update two things and whatnot, and read two textures. So if I could combine these into one, that would be great. So I'm gonna copy this and paste it into Photoshop. Okay. I'm actually just gonna move the Photoshop document across. There'll be a bunch of my pop-up dialogues that are gonna show on my other monitor, and last time I tried to move them onto the screen, but then afterwards when I was getting back into other work, I kept having to move them back. So I'm just gonna not show that part, I guess. So to have them all in one texture, we've got our normal map, which is showing this way. And then we still have a gap for an alpha channel. So when we make, I don't know, there are a bunch of ways to do this. The one might be like if you looked at this blue channel and you like change the levels, it kind of gives us that cell thing back. But it's not perfect, right? Like there's this white line in between that's not great. So instead of doing that, what I'll do is take a copy of the cell and put that one in this alpha channel. And I think just, okay, I said I wouldn't drag them over, but here I am. I'm just gonna tweak the levels a bit so that this has more contrast in it. We can always turn this down by multiplying it by a certain value, but this way we sort of hopefully have more data to work with. So let's save this out. And alpha channels, save as cells. There should be a pop-up somewhere asking me about format options. Okay. I use Targa for this because Photoshop and PNGs are not fantastic for me. Photoshop assumes a bunch of things that I don't want, especially when working with alpha. So let's delete that old one, use this now. And now things are pretty messed up because we need to tell our shader what part it should be using. So let's get back into it and say, when we multiply by text, we're not using the whole texture, we're just using that alpha channel. So that should fix the one part. And then we also don't want this color to be the normal map itself. We want to use that as a normal map. So let's read the texture in the surface in the fragment. So we're actually already reading the texture here. So let's call it that. And then we need to transform the RGB values to be more like what we want out of a normal map. So that's the R and the G. In a texture, they're between 0 and 1, and we want those to be between -1 and 1 instead. So we have to multiply this by 2. That makes it from 0 to 2. And then if we -1, then that puts it back into -1 to 1. And then we should be able to say, okay, and this is where things can potentially get a little screwy, but let's see. This should be text. And this, let's just give it a flat value for now. Okay, so we do see the normal map appearing, and that's cool, but it's not scrolling with the mesh. So let's just do the exact same thing that we did here, where we add the time to our UVs. And now they kind of match up, and this is pretty cool. It may be a little bit extreme or not. We can play with numbers here. And this is going to happen pretty fast, so I don't know. There's some weird distortion, or not distortion, but like a pixelating that's happening. If you ever see this, a pretty good likelihood is that you've just had Unity running for a very long time, as I have. And so this time variable can eventually become a problem because it's just like, it's too big, and you're losing precision on it. So if you wrap that inside frac, depending on what you're doing with it, it might help. So in this case, it did. It probably something I should do here too. Although when you're just moving verts around, they're so low res that maybe it doesn't matter. But ideally, we want these two to be the same so that the texture matches up. And now we can give this some color. So I think before we do that, I was a bit worried that like this sort of transition between the two cells might be too sharp, and I think that might be true still. I missed out on a whole bunch of chat messages. Is the alien going to expand before exploding? The alien absolutely should do that. Is there any open source software as part of your art pipeline? Open source. Photoshop, no. Blender, sometimes. Substance, Filter Forge, ZBrush. I think Blender's the only thing that I use sometimes. I was just working on a vertex displacement shader. How do you solve the gaps between vertices? That is a really, really good question. And I sort of have relied on luck and hoping people don't see it. what what it what I think it is. So there are a lot of reasons why that might happen, right? It could be because um your UVs aren't like perfectly unwrapped. It could be because when the game sort of creates the discontinuity, um, it's like the normal of the two opposing verts just aren't exactly the same anymore. And I don't know. Um, it could also potentially be that like this is less likely, but it's possible that you're when you're looking up this texture, that it's like in between two maps where the one side of the thing is looking up actually a different set of pixels to the other side. It's really, really hard to know. And you can sort of see this line going down here. And I'm just going to ignore it. I use Perlin noise on a sphere. Yeah, Perlin noise is typically what I use. Or some type of Perlin-like noise. I just think that for this one in particular, it's a good look to use. I mean, Substance calls it cells. I don't know. I think it's like sort of a Voronoi noise, but it's a Voronoi that has like the not a straight up distance. It's like it just feels softer. It's the alien made out of marshmallows. So currently the alien's still being made. It may or may not be made of marshmallows. Cool. So I'm gonna blur this thing. Let's give it a blur here. Okay, not so much. Just to soften out this. And then whenever you make changes to your normal map, you typically want to normalize it again afterwards. Okay, so I'm gonna copy this thing, paste that over the previous one, and save it. Okay, so now that thing's a lot softer, and yeah, okay, I'm a lot more happy with this. More happier. Cool, so let's give it a color now. So we've got one color there, and we could just use this straight up. Say albedo should be that color. And then we can choose our color here. Don't quite know what color this thing's gonna be, but luckily we can just change it. So we can change it when we know what the alien's gonna be more like. But this is like kind of maybe bland, just being one color. So let's give it another one. I used to always correct things so that so obviously in code things are gonna be spelled like color without the U, but then in the readable part I'd make it with the U. And then I worked in the States for a while where it's like, hang on, I'm working with people who don't expect the U there. At which point I started just like shortening things to col. But now that I'm back in South Africa, I can spell things right again. Color 2. Okay, so we're going to use some blend between those two colors. So we can use usually when you're blending colors, you don't really want to use a lerp, but if the colors are similar enough as I intend them to be here, that's probably fine. And then we'll use text.a, which is the alpha channel that we used here. And now the gaps between the cells are more black, but we probably don't want black itself. We want... Oh, it looks so gross. What we can also do, I mean, it is an explosion after all, is if we make both of these colors HDR colors, then we can pick like very bright colors instead. Which means that like they could start glowing if we wanted. And the thinking here is that maybe maybe the part in between is like extra bright. I don't know. It might make it feel more like it's about to explode or busy exploding. So if it's gonna be like this, I think I want the higher bits to take up more of this area. So we could either do that by changing the texture itself, and that, but that would influence how much these get distorted. And I'm kind of liking how that looks right now. So instead, I will change it in here, where instead of just using this straight up, I'll use like a power of it. So let's just call it float. I don't know, u equals that. Okay, let's see what difference it's really made. So now it's much closer to being inside the gaps. I'm actually liking this red in between. Okay. And what's kind of nice about using this as a surface shader is we have like smoothness and metallic and whatever as part of their just built-in default Lambert type thing. It's weird. It's called Lambert, but oh, it's not. It's just standard. Cool. So as part of the standard shader, they've got smoothness and metallic. And metallic is probably not supposed to be up. All right. So this is like the core, I guess, of our explosion. Let's get back to having this animate. It's not very noticeable for now. I'll go with your technique of hoping they don't notice. Unity was made in America. You're right. No, wait. Netherlands, I think. Some European country. Yeah. Okay, but where was it founded? Copenhagen. I'm pretty sure they would use a U. But most programming languages are written with Americans in mind. So I'm probably going to lose this battle. It looks like watermelon popcorn. It does. Cool. So this is part of it, and this is like pretty cool, but the way it disappears is really sudden. And that's not great. So ideally you have some sort of fade, and you could just like fade it into being transparent, but that brings a bunch of other problems themselves. One of the main ones I think is that like transparent things, without working super hard at it, transparent and being super expensive, transparent things don't really give you like the ability to have like well, they just interact badly with lighting and shadows, which reminds me this thing could have a shadow. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is to try and clip away parts of this mesh, so that the transition becomes more gradual. And the advantage, and I kind of drew this in my sketch earlier, is that if you think about how like water breaks apart, or even the balloon itself, right? It's sort of like viscous, kind of sticks together. Like it's not just every particle going off on its own, but it sort of tries to stay together. Or like paint being thrown, that sort of stickiness. So if we cut away at this, then it gives us like the core of this thing being more viscous. So let's start clipping away. And maybe we want to control this somehow. So if you want to animate things in a shader, but you want to animate it as part of the particle system, you can give it custom data. But something that I find very convenient is that if I'm not using the vertex colors, that I just borrow that. And I'm currently setting these colors in the material itself. I'm not setting them in the particle system, which means that I've got like 4 channels of information that I can use for animating things. So we could use the alpha channel of the color to animate the progress of the sort of cutaway thing. But we need to put that in first. So we need color and okay, hopefully that is enough. Okay, and then let's just make sure that let's see, if we make the color of this thing, I just want to make sure that this is coming through right. So if we animate the color by lifetime, go from white to black in the alpha. when this plays, right, so we can see it going from white to black, and that's what I was looking for. So I know that that's working. I can set this back to what it was. Okay. So to cut something away, there's a function for that called clip. And you put a value in here, and as long as this value is less than 0, then those pixels won't render, which is pretty handy. So we can take, say, the alpha of our texture and just like clip that away. So if we say like minus 0.5, then we should see already a bunch of this disappearing, right? But when you think of like this balloon or whatever popping, or the fluid sort of dissolving, typically it's like you'll have a large surface, and where it's pulled taut, that is where the fluid is like the thinnest. So that's where it should be dissolving first. So we need to invert this thing. So we could say 1 minus that, which would just be half minus, right? Just to see for now, just to show you for now how this might look. So it's like that's already the sort of like sort of dissolve that I'm looking for, but it's too smooth. Like those circles are too perfect. So we'll probably want to add some noise into that alpha channel. I don't know. Maybe this will be fine. Paste that back in here. Yeah. So now we've got a more of a broken up edge, and that's cool. And where is this? Okay. So now instead of just using some solid value, we'll use that vertex alpha. So n.a. Okay, now, right, now we can see this thing sort of like transitioning out to, and we can make it so that this happens later on. Okay, we can maybe have this last a bit longer, and just animate this in a way that And we can see in the shadow that there's some weird things happening too, because the shadow is still a sphere. So what I'm gonna do is what's really great about surface. Again, surface shaders are great when it comes to light. Surface shaders are also kind of being replaced with all of that node-based stuff, which is a positive thing. Cool. And now you can see that the shadow fits this like mesh dissolving as well. And that's great too. So I think this is pretty good. Maybe it's a little slow. Okay. Right. So that's one part. Now we want a shockwave. So we want a shockwave. We want bits of this like liquid shooting off. We want blasts of I don't know, like something shooting out. Maybe there's debris, there's dust and smoke. I don't know. I don't know if a bug acid explosion would be smoky. Maybe not. But yeah, so let's make the other parts. So let's do the okay, let's do like a distortion. So I've already written an explosion thing, and I don't really feel like writing again, but I'll just go through it to show you what it does, if I remember what it's called. Screen distort mesh. And this one works on a 3D mesh. So for this one, we can use like any other sphere. So I have a geosphere that's pretty low poly, and that's good. And you can see these geospheres like rising up and how they're kind of distorting the world here. So we don't want it to animate. We want it to be fairly fast. I don't know, something for now. We want it to emit from just the center, maybe. Maybe we want it to be a little higher. So sphere, turn down this radius. Raise this up like 0.5-ish and make it larger. And turn down the emission so there's only one of them. Okay, so now it's just popping between these two. And what does this shader do again? Polaroid says it could be bubbly instead of smoky. Yeah. Bubbly sounds good. Where is this thing? Screen distort mesh. Okay, so the key thing in this shader is that it uses a grab pos, which is like rendering the screen as it is without transparent objects, I think. And then later on, reads this back in, but distorts the UVs. And how am I distorting the UVs? I'm using the Fresnel, the vertex color. Oh, I see. So this is why it has to be a 3D mesh, because it's distorting like based on the Fresnel, which is like it relies on the normal of the mesh in the view direction. So if we want to animate this thing, we're animating the vertex alpha. Color. Oops, wrong way around. So this is like the sort of shockwave thing. It probably needs to grow over time too. Okay, so this shockwave should probably be faster than this. Um, so I think I'd like this to have like more vertical movement too. So I'm gonna try something. Make a small and have this one like moving up. Okay, so if it's moving up, it can no longer be a sphere. It has to be a cone, small angle, and rotated. Okay, smaller. Is it really that small? Oh. Maybe the size should be on different axes. 3D start size. Okay, I think this needs to scroll fast. And this can happen slightly afterwards. Let's layer that animation. Yeah. Okay, a little larger on the sides, I think. Cool. How's life? Pretty good. I'm liking this watermelon popcorn explosion. Uh, although if we really want to get into it, there's a lot in life that is really messed up. So I'm looking for a shockwave to emanate out from here. And if it were a 3D game, then I mean, like a first-person game, you might need it to have like height. But because our camera is almost always like from the top, then a horizontal billboard may be enough. Um, why can't I see it? Oh, that's why. Um, Turn this emission down, make it so we're only firing one of them, and give it a material. And I think we've got one of these before. It's like shockwave or something to do with that. Shockwave. Hmm. Was it circle? I haven't planned for it, but I'd like to. Circle? No. Blurred circle. Maybe I could work with this one. Okay, so as a shockwave, it should be a lot faster. More subtle than this. And not disappear so harshly. Okay, I think that distort thing should be larger. Not sure. 7. I feel like everything is just too, like the timing is too similar. We want to layer this better. So maybe this happens slightly later. And this then gets pushed further away too. Okay, maybe not as late as that. Okay, this is the shock wave. Larger. Hmm. What's Free Lives' current goal? Um, Fire and Tropical Island. That's a pretty good one. Did Jared just say mass suicide? Wow. Wow. Broforce 1, our private jet. Sounds pretty good. An electrical jet? Do you get electrical jets? Yeah. Right. Fund the developments of electrical jets, and if not that, then blast ourselves so hard that we can escape all of the fallout that would be leaving behind to second Earth. Glad to see you streaming again. Thank you. Watching your streams get me so pumped to work. That's great. I often get into this like weird cycle where I'm just like twiddling values because it like doesn't feel quite right, and I don't quite understand why. And it's like one of the big reasons why. So like especially with effects artists, people talk about um, having to be like an artist first, an artist slash animator, because it combines like so many of these things together. And if you're a really good animator, you might look at this and be like, oh yeah, you know what would make this so much better if you made this thing shorter or faster, or you offset the timing of these things or whatever. Um, and as someone who's like not an experienced animator, I just look at it and I'm like, something doesn't feel right, but I don't quite know what yet. And it might just be that it needs more things, but it might not. um, Needs bits flying off. Maybe that's it. Or maybe this is too fast. Hmm. Oh, that's such a small difference. What? Um, hmm. Maybe this should start further down. In which case, this thing shouldn't be delayed as fast. Delayed as long. So I thought I'd lower it to try and make the top part and the bottom part feel more connected. Slight delay. Cool. Um, I think what I want now to is like sort of a, a so we do have a burst. We've got this like shockwave coming out. We've got the distortion, but like more of a like a white flash or something just before. Um, hmm. What's causing the explosion in the game? It would be an alien that explodes when it dies. Um, I don't know if it runs at. I don't know if it runs at you the way that like a bending or something does, or if it attacks and then it explodes on death. Um, but I mean, the point is, it's an alien. That's properly beautiful. Thank you. It came out better than I expected. I should just expect more of myself and then be disappointed. Um, so if we rotate this, or it should be hemisphere. Um, so what I'm trying to get now is hopefully this page has it. This sort of like flare type thing, just something at the start of an explosion that makes it look as if there was, I don't know, ignition, or it doesn't even have to make sense. It's more just like one or two frames where there's just like a I hate saying pop, but like just a really bright light to catch your eye and tell you that the thing started, like this. And for something like this, there are a bunch of ways to do this too, right? There's so I was talking at the start of the stream about how, like what are you going to choose to represent something? Um, and this could be a 3D mesh that is like star shaped, or it could be a 2D thing that just has this kind of starburst graphic on it. The problem, I guess, with something that's just a 2D texture is that it's like very repetitive. If you see like a chain reaction of a bunch of these things happening, you might see the exact same shape across all of them. And then it sort of breaks the illusion of there being an actual physical explosion. And so what's nice about a 3D shape is you can um, you can spawn this thing and rotate it in random directions to give you lots of different looking shapes, even though it's just one 3D mesh. But something else you can also do is to just draw like one part of this flare and spawn a bunch of particles that are just the same flare duplicated around. Um, and I think that's the way I'm going to try it here. So let's turn this rate over time down, 0, and give us, say, 10 of these flare things. And they should be really, really fast, like less than 0.2 even. And stretched. Smaller. Okay, maybe this shape should be a lot smaller too. I don't know. let's give us a texture to use. So let's make it. So this doesn't need to be large at all. Normally I would paint something, but maybe one more. So this does have a little bit of a danger of like maybe pushing us more toward like a cartoon, but we'll do our best to make it fit the rest of the art. Something like that looks okay, I think. Cool. So let's use this. There's a color pop up somewhere that I cannot see. You know, having multiple windows and not, oh, there it is. I don't want to move it across. Anyway, so this, and let's put this in the alpha channel and give this like some sort of maybe a bloom. Outer glow. Oh, I'm gonna regret moving across. So what I'm doing here isn't just like trying to paint the texture of what it'll look like. It's thinking about how it's gonna fade away. Because one of my shaders has like a clip away kind of animation in it. So I'm trying to make something with that in mind. Yeah, I think this might work. Just need to redo this. Maybe it won't need to. We'll see. Save as TGA with alpha channels. This will be explode flare. I just hit enter, not seeing what the dialogue was because it's behind everything, and I'm just gonna hope that the settings were right. Copy explosion. Okay, that may be right. Create a new material for explode flare, particle levels. So all that this shader does is I think it takes like the alpha channel or also the color, and when you change the vertex color, it sort of clips away at this. Copy explode flare here. Okay, so they're facing the wrong way. Image. Is it counterclockwise? Okay, it is counterclockwise. Let's make it longer. Four. A little larger. Why am I not seeing? One? Whoa, something weird. Huh. Okay. So they're appearing outside and going in. One way that I can fix this is by changing their pivot. I don't know what their pivot needs to be. That was just a lucky guess. Hey, it's Devolver Digital. Hey, Devolver. Okay, make this smaller. So I think that's about the shape that I want. It just needs to do the animation. Um, hmm. Show only selected. Explodes and then fades away. That is not what I expected. How does this shader work? OMG, I can't wait for going PSVR. Smart to say that while Devolver is watching. Um, Wait, so it looks like it should be the Vertex Alpha. Okay, I think we can get immediate wins by making this brighter. And larger. Maybe not quite so bright. Or just more saturated. I think that's pretty good. Um, what also helps a lot is to add a light, especially when you have bright things like that. Um, I think we have a light for this. A light prefab. Particles light, I think. Hmm. Hmm. Ratio 1. Ah, there it is. So no speed. Um, color green, yellow, green. Make sure we're only emitting one. And with lights, because you just want the light portion, you can say render mode none, and the light will still appear. Okay, this thing should be pretty fast. It's looking really good. Thank you. Spitey Gamer says hello. Hi, Spitey Gamer. Spitey. So I'm just turning up the intensity a lot so I can see the range of the light. The problem with putting lights in your particles, in your effects, is everything that the light touches gets rendered more. So you want it to only touch the things that it can actually you want. You want it to touch as few things as possible. And then I can turn the intensity back down. So now if this is next to things, then they will flash as well. But it's quite brief. I think those flares can be bigger still. Spitey Gamer asks, what is this? This is an explosion for when exploding aliens die. It's for a game called Second Earth that Free Lives has a team developing, and we've been working on it since I think it's about 3 people per month since January. And you can play it. at this URL. Although this build is like, I don't know, old. And we have an update coming out at some point before the world dies. Hopefully. Okay. So I think what I want next is like bits flying off. I don't know if they're bits of bug or if it's just like rocks and debris. Maybe both. Debris. I think I've got a rock particle somewhere. Rocks with bottom. I think that is used precisely for particles. This looks like a weird texture. Oh well. Change its motion to be shooting upward. And they should all not be exactly the same that way. So change their spawn rotation. And they should not be going off into the air indefinitely. So there's this gravity modifier, and you can use the gravity thing, and that's okay. But the problem with using this is, oh, you do have a random between two constants. I seem to remember that this couldn't be a random thing, in which case you'd usually want to apply a force anyway, but this is cool. Change speed. Are you excited for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order? I haven't been that excited about Star Wars in quite a while. Which isn't always a bad thing. What I found was when the first batch of the new Star Wars movies came out, I was really keen. And then afterwards, after the first movie, it was kind of like, I felt like I wanted to see more of something. Like, I miss epic lightsaber battles and whatnot. And it just made me do a bunch of like fan art and fan games. Immediately after coming out of that movie, I was like, oh, I really want to have a lightsaber battle. And then in one of the games, one of the following weeks, I jammed a game that was like a VR game where you had lightsabers and things shooting at you, and you would deflect them. So if ever you're unhappy with something, you can use it to drive your own creative pursuits. And I'll probably end up watching it anyway. What I did like a lot actually was Rogue One, which I don't know if people seem somewhat divided on it. And I think what I appreciated in Rogue One is this like feeling of, hey, it's worth doing some. There are some things that are worth doing, even if like you end up dying anyway. I really like themes of self-sacrifice. Okay. So I'm gonna slow down all of these because these particles are probably gonna last longer, and I wanna be able to see this burst properly. So I need more downforce, maybe. Or maybe they just don't go so high. Okay, need to vary their size. And they should rotate a bunch, like spinning in the air, some of them. Make it some number between 720 and something. Cool. Maybe they should collide with the ground. There was the one particle that kept going on forever, like one of those rocks spinning across water. Skipping stones. So it looks like it's colliding with the world. So let's raise this off of the world a little. They're bouncing a whole lot. So we'll lower their bounce to something like that. And then when they die, they should fade away by getting smaller. Some shadows for these would be nice too. Although they also then highlight how they don't quite touch the ground. So let's change their radius scale. And when they hit the ground, they're still continuing to rotate, which we also don't want. So in the rotation over lifetime, we can do random between two curves. And we really just want this to go down to 0 at some point before they die. There should be friction or something. Dampen. Okay, don't think these are the best rocks to use because of how they can land on their pointy bits. Maybe I have another rock mesh I can use. Rock or stone. This sounds potentially bad. So the main thing I'm looking for is I want something that's rock shaped, but that is also a low word count because I'm potentially going to use a bunch. And there may be lots of these happening on the screen. So let's right, and this is okay. We just need to make sure that how this is triangulating. Right, that seems all right. Oh, doesn't matter. Okay, why can't I see you? Are you really big or really small? Oh, really small. Okay. Size. Where is this collider radius? What's the difference between radius and radius thickness? Oh, I'm changing the wrong thing. Didn't mean it for it to be in the shape. I meant for this to be in the collision. So here, radius scale. Cool. And it's also changed the lifetime. Oh, it is. Make it shorter. Cool. I think I'm gonna take a break now, and I guess that means the stream is over. Thanks for joining me. I hope you learned something. I hope you had a good time, and see you soon.